Welcome back. This is the second episode of the Number One Comics podcast. This is the only podcast that is dedicated to first issues. I'm your host, Jonah, and with me is Bill.
How's it going?
I just noticed that we were in the exact same outfits as the last episode.
That's all right.
Like we hadn't changed clothes, or maybe they were just filmed in the exact same night.
I actually have a closet full of just this outfit.
Black hoodies?
Yeah.
All right.
Like in Free Guy. It's just like that.
Yep, I have nothing but maroon quarter zips.
Yeah.
So we'll by episode 5 we'll have changed clothes.
Yes.
Today we are talking about none other than the Untold Tales of Spider-Man. This is a comic that was published back in 1995 by Marvel Comics. Cover price on this, $1.95. The writer was Kurt Busiek.
Yes.
Now, how do you say his name?
I think that's how you say it.
Busiek?
Busiek.
Busiek? Anyway, Kurt Busiek. My apologies, Kurt, if I've mispronounced your name. It won't be the last time, I'm sure.
Right.
And the artist was Pat Olive. And again, I'm probably mispronouncing his name as well. He's an artist I was not familiar with.
No, I wasn't either.
When I saw the name, I had never seen that name before. So completely unfamiliar with him. Now, at the launch of this title, there were 4 core Spidey books already. You had Amazing, you had Spectacular, you had Web of, and then you had the kind of the non-adjective Spider-Man.
Right.
So the titular character was really bogged down in those 4 books with his own continuity at that point.
Well, and this was during the Clone Saga also. There's all these variant covers that came out. They actually staggered these so that every week there was a new Spider-Man comic out.
Yeah.
And you kind of had to collect all of them so that you knew what the heck was going on.
Right. There was a lot of crossover within the issues of each of those titles.
Yep.
You couldn't just pick up one, because I've got a few titles from that era, just randomly, and you pick one up and you really have no idea what's going on in that unless you'd read the 3 previous titles in the other books.
Exactly.
So I think Marvel with this, I think what they were looking for was something fresh, something easy, kind of a jumping on point for new readers, which really for this, it meant they had to go back in time.
Yeah. And
we'll talk a little bit more about that. This issue takes place shortly after the events of Amazing Spider-Man number 6, which is when the lizard was introduced.
Yeah.
So that's how long ago this book takes place.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things with this book is Marvel at the time was trying to, with all of the price increases of comics around the time, they were looking to do a title at a lower price point. So I believe the series going forward was like a 99-cent book.
I think so.
If I'm not
I think
mistaken.
the only reason this one was so high is because it was the first issue.
Yeah.
And this was also during a time where where Peter Parker was no longer Spider-Man in the main comic, in the main storyline continuity. It was where the Clone Saga is a whole convoluted thing. We're not going to go into, because we could be sitting here for 2 hours.
Yeah, that's a different podcast altogether.
But at this time, Peter Parker's clone, Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, it was determined that he was actually the real Peter, and the Peter for the last 5 years had been the clone. So they kind of switched. Peter was going off with Mary Jane. She was pregnant. They were doing their own thing. And Ben Reilly was going to take over as Spider-Man. So this was going back to the Lee Ditko era of Spider-Man. It's kind of like Spider-Man year 1.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost.
Right. 100%.
He's still a teenager. He hasn't quite figured out his powers. There's no Mary Jane. There's no Gwen Stacy. I think his love interest in this one is not even fully established, but it's hinted as Betty Brant.
Betty Brant from the one that's giving him his paycheck. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. One thing that you had me thinking about when you were talking about the Clone Saga, and again, the debacle that was is a discussion for another time. The best thing to come out of that, and the thing that I still like to this day, is the design of the Scarlet Spider. I absolutely love that costume.
Yeah.
So that is the only good thing, in my opinion, to come out of the Clone Wars.
Absolutely.
And this title came out of it as well, to a certain extent. So let's run through a brief synopsis. Again, not a not a page-by-page breakdown, but scene by scene. So our story opens here with Spidey battling a villain called the Scorcher. This is on a rooftop. It's him and his henchmen. His henchmen, they look like they borrowed their costumes from the Foot, from the Ninja Turtles.
They do, yeah.
Villains. Spidey, it's evident that he lacks experience in this. Like you'd mentioned, it does go back to year one. Because of that lack of experience, he is on the defensive pretty much the entire battle. And because of that, the Scorcher is able to escape. Spidey himself has to escape an angry, Spidey-hating mob, because remember, no one liked Spidey. The general populace, the police, no one was really a fan of his.
Right.
We spend a few pages then getting caught up on Peter's less than idyllic life. So we have his aunt who's trying to make ends meet. He's an outcast at school. He's working for that insufferable J. Jonah Jameson. We are given a one-page rundown on his origin, which I thought was pretty cool, especially if you're brand new to reading Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That's good to have. A Jonah, typical Jonah, a rant sparks an idea in Peter, and as Spidey, he drops in on the police captain Stacy, basically saying that he wants to become a cop.
Yeah.
And he wants to join the force. And after Stacy explains to him, it's not that easy, Spidey bails out on that idea. Back at the apartment, Spider-Man and he hands his most recent paycheck that he'd gotten from Miss Brandt over to his Aunt May. Over the radio, he hears that the Scorcher has been located and is surrounded by police, so he springs back into action. He's heading to the warehouse where they're spotted at. He drops in on the Scorcher and his cronies. They battle again. The Scorcher had stolen a briefcase with an unknown electronic content, really this MacGuffin device,
right,
for lack of a better term. And we don't even know who he's been hired to deliver it to. It's alluded, though, that someone has hired him. So Spidey looks to foil that plan. Now, as the battle ensues, the Scorcher, he's torched the entire warehouse. Before getting charbroiled, Spidey manages to use his webbing to bring down a rooftop-mounted water tower onto the building itself and douses the flames. So the fire and Scorcher's plans, they're all washed out, and Spidey delivers the Scorcher to police custody. Now, he's expecting maybe a kudos, but really he just gets berated because they wanted the Scorcher to escape, because they wanted to follow him to find out who he was supposed to deliver that briefcase to. And this just so happens that this briefcase is picked up by a shadowy stranger amongst all the chaos. In the end, Spidey caught more blame from the Bugle, and Peter Parker caught a bad cold and ended up in bed. And that was it. That's a real quick synopsis, but I will say there was a lot to read in this issue. Like, it was stacked full of exposition and dialogue and a number of different scenes. We talked about with last week's episode how decompressed the storytelling has become, starting around the mid-2000s. And you go back to the mid-90s, and you got so much content there. So that was pretty impressive. Let's talk about our thoughts. I want your thoughts first, Bill, on this title.
I remember very fondly when this title came out, and we started, again, we were suffering burnout from Clone Saga. I like this because it almost, at the same time, the Spider-Man animated series was going on.
Love that series.
Which they also had a comic for at the same time. But it reminded me of that. It was like an episodic kind of villain of the week kind of thing.
And it also had the same pacing as that series, too, because if you go back and watch the Spider-Man animated series now, it is so fast-paced. Like, it is scene.
Yeah.
And it's not really a slow plotting plot. And I don't mean that bad, because you look at like Batman the animated series around the same time was the complete opposite. Where it was much slower, much more plot driven.
Yeah.
And that Spidey animated series was very much like this. I agree 100%.
Well, and another thing I like about this series too is that the villains, maybe this was kind of a backhanded way of them introducing new villains into the main continuity, but there were ones from this series that ended up in the mainstream continuity as well. One of my favorite ones was Swarm. He was basically just a guy that was made up of
bees,
a giant group of bees.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we got some pretty cool stuff out of it. And not only that, but it's like, it takes you back to that time in like the 60s. And, it's very much, it looks the same or looks kind of, similar. Of course, nobody's going to be Ditko, but.
No, but that's one thing I noticed too, is the artist that this Pat Olive, he does such a good job of capturing that spirit of Ditko.
Yeah.
And even Kurt Busiek does a good job of capturing, and I don't know if these were written kind of in that Marvel style at the time that Stan Lee and Ditko had worked on or worked with, but I could see where they both were harnessing the spirits of those two great creators.
Definitely.
With this issue. That was really the biggest thing that I noticed about it is it was a great throwback to that era, and it's unlike anything that you see in comic books today.
Exactly.
Unless it's intentionally designed today to be a throwback to that, like this was back in the 90s.
Right.
So one thing that I wanted to mention on this is on the backside, I'll flip this around here without dropping it. There is a bonus story that we were treated to. Did you read this one as well?
I did not.
No? Okay. It's a Fantastic Four story. It focuses just on the Thing. He's kind of on a date and ends up fighting some sort of synthoid monster on a bridge. Just a real simple story. I don't know that, because again, this Untold Tales of Spider-Man, this did continue on for a couple of years. I don't know that Fantastic Four line did. I think this was just kind of added in as a bonus, but that was a pretty cool feature. Again, you're getting two stories for the price of one, and there was so much crammed into that 20 pages of Spider-Man story that it took me much longer to read that than it did the new Avengers #1 that we talked about the previous week.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what happened, with this series in terms of, continuing on. I mentioned it did continue on. It actually ran for 26 issues with 2 annuals. It ended in 1997. And again, I was largely out of comics at that time. Yeah. So this is the only issue of this series that I bought. It's the only issue that I have in my collection. Now, writer Kurt Busiek, he was also responsible for Thunderbolts, which I'm sure we'll talk about because I absolutely love that series.
Yeah.
And he also created Astro City, which was initially published by Image Comics. I don't know if you ever read any of Astro City, but that's a great title. Yeah, it's definitely worth picking up. At the point of the 90s when this series was launched, fandom, like I said, they've been complaining of the increasing cover prices. So this book was designed to retail for 99 cents. There is a really good blog post out there from editor at the time, Tom Brevoort, recounting his experience in working on this title. So if you're interested in learning more about the title and sort of the creative thought process that went into it, that's a really good blog article to check out. So again, that's on Tom Brevoort's blog. Any last comments that you want to make on this before we wrap things up?
Normally, more Spider-Man is good. I love all the Spider-Man I can get, but this was a time where this was a time where my dad and I became very burnt out on not just Spider-Man, but on comics in general. And I think this is where we kind of stopped, was right around this time period.
Yep. I'm pretty sure that's kind of the reason I'd only picked up this one copy, is because of that, which is a shame because I haven't read the rest of the issues. I want to now.
See, I don't think I made it to all 26.
Yeah.
But we did make it pretty far. I want to say we at least kept up to probably about a year or so.
One thing that I'd be curious to know is how successfully you can kind of thread the plots here into the history of Spider-Man without retconning things.
Yeah.
And so I would be interested, again, just to go back and check out those 26 issues and see
and
how it compares to some of those older titles, and if it's stepping on its own toes, so to speak.
Well, see, this wasn't him taking on Green Goblin or taking on Dr. Octopus or anything like that. This was him. This was kind of like what he did in between those big climactic moments.
Because I
like
think
the
I
death
saw
of Gwen Stacy and all that stuff. You know,
I think I saw in the back of this, the second issue, he takes on Man-Bat? No, Batwing.
Batwing.
The coming of Batwing. And then he does take on Sandman in issue 3.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a big villain for him. So, yeah, I definitely, I think this was a very cool trip down memory lane. You know, it's so weird because we're talking about a comic that's 30 years old that was designed to look like at this point it'd be 60 years old or older. And I think that that's a very cool concept. So I'm definitely interested in going back and checking out more. And I think you guys should too. As always, be sure to like, subscribe. We are the number one comics podcast. You can find us on Facebook. You can also send us an email to it's the number one comics podcast at gmail.com. We'll put a link for that in here as well. But thanks for joining us. And we'll be back next week with another episode. I think we're going to be talking about Astonishing X-Men.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
See you later.